If you've ever tried studying Japanese, you would certainly know how challenging and daunting it can be. Like with any language, there's an absolute mountain of content to cover, from grammar to vocabulary, pronunciation, slang, knowing what the best fitting of all of these are in certain situations depending on the context. With listening, reading, writing, and speaking, they can all be so very different. No matter how deep you go into that study, you'll inevitably face a few problems. One, since there's so much to learn, how do you find the time to do it all? And of course, how can you put it to practical use? Yes, reading in a textbook and studying the theory is good and all, but you're learning the language to actually, use it, right? And unless you're living in the one country that speaks Japanese or have a network of Japanese speakers that are willing to practice with you, it can feel like hitting a wall in your progress. So allow me, someone who has been studying the language for over a decade now, to go through my personal experience and how I managed to study Japanese in my everyday life. We know that learning the basics of Japanese, such as hiragana, katakana, and some simple grammar structures, is easy enough since there's plenty of resources out there. But we also know that something like Duolingo, while yes, is good for building daily study habits, isn't enough to get further into the language. Granted, that's about as deep as most people are willing to go, but if you really want to see tangible growth in your language learning capabilities, you've got to push further and harder into some more advanced stuff. Challenge your abilities, but also balance it, so you don't burn out or overwhelm yourself too quickly. As for myself, I'd probably say that my Japanese level is about conversational. I'm definitely better at reading and writing than I am at speaking and listening. I struggle with that quite a bit. I've been learning it since about 3rd grade of primary school, and I studied it all throughout high school, and I've continued studying it by myself ever since high school. So I haven't had any formal education since my schooling years, which was over 5 years ago now. But of course my goal is to be fluent in the language and to eventually use it on a consistent basis. But I think it's very important to establish the goals for what you want to achieve in a language. And they can be different from everyone. Perhaps your goal is just wanting to play some limited games in Japanese, or watch some anime in Japanese. Regardless of what your goal is though, staying consistent is super important, and that's probably the biggest hurdle for studying any language or picking up any hobby. As for myself, getting back into study hasn't been a priority, since I don't have a lot of money. I don't need help sticking to studying it and building good habits since I've already done that, and I don't know what level of classes I'd need to go into. I'm a little all over the place and probably have bits and pieces of mid-level to high-level stuff. If I was to gauge myself, I'd probably say I'm somewhere between N3 and N4, definitely higher towards N3 on the reading and writing, but much more N4 on speaking and listening. Maybe a personal tutor would be best for me, but again, money, so I make do with what I can. So my goal is fluency. I also try to break that down into some smaller goals. So after my 2023 trip, I realized that my biggest issue was a lack in vocabulary. So I spent the majority of 2024 focusing on upping my word bank and list of vocabulary. Coming into the new year though and visiting Japan only a few months ago, I'd now say I need to improve my listening and grammar to be able to translate sentences on the fly and create sentences on the fly much easier. So with all that out of the way, what does my daily Japanese study routine actually look like? Well, I treat my Japanese study as part of my morning routine. So after I clamber out of bed in the morning, I jump onto the computer and get to studying before breakfast. I'll start with some basic kanji study using Kanji Garden. I mentioned this in my Duolingo video a while back, but Kanji Garden is one of many kanji learning websites. I think the most popular one is Wanikani, but I found that a bit limiting for what I wanted. There is a paid version, but I've never used it. With the free version, you only get a max of 10 revisions a day. It's fast and efficient, so I like it for a good early warm-up. Whenever a new kanji pops up, I add the sample words that I don't already know it provides into my Anki deck, which then takes me to part 2 of my routine, Anki. Anki really is the best program for studying Japanese. It is an indispensable tool in your arsenal, and I can't emphasize enough how useful it is for me. It's just a basic flashcard creation program, but so many people in the language learning community swear by it, and for a good reason. It's really easy to create basic flashcards, and easy to keep studying with it. Some people have really detailed ones with pictures and videos, example sentences and sounds. I've been using it since about 2022, and I just keep things pretty bare bones and simple. Just the word on one side and the reading and meaning on the other. That's enough for me. I keep everything in one giant deck of flashcards that I've just had for about 2 years now, and I add to it whenever I learn new words. So I've got a backlog of about 600 or so words, going back over 6 months. And I only do about 5 new words a day, so I don't get overwhelmed. But where do I get all the words from? That's where the immersion comes in. Immersion is, of course, the best and easiest way to learn a language, but it can be pretty hard to do that. I try to do it to the best I can while living in a predominantly English-speaking country. This is where the weebiness comes in, because of course I mainly consume Japanese media. It's no secret. I watch anime, I talk about anime, I read manga, I play JRPGs, listen to J-pop, all that good stuff, and I genuinely love it. Part of the reason I've been studying Japanese for so long and stayed motivated to learn it is because I have fun consuming Japanese media, learning the language from it, and enriching my experiences with it. In regards to reading, on my last trip to Japan, I picked up a bunch of books about illustration, freelancing, and graphic design, and kind of breaking into that field since it's something I am personally interested in. I've been going through those books, breaking down the grammar, and adding new words to my vocabulary list to study. In regards to gaming, I picked up a few Japan-exclusive JRPGs such as Dragon Quest X Offline and Yokai Watch 4, and I've been playing through them, doing the same thing, reading, listening to the dialogue and the voiceover, translating it all, and then adding new words to my vocabulary bank. And then most recently, I've been able to watch anime without English subtitles, but instead with Japanese subtitles, so I can read along, practice my listening, and just kind of surround myself in the language a bit more. If you don't have access to these kinds of things, like with anime subtitles, it can be hard to find Japanese subs because it's a whole licensing issue. Another easier way to get Japanese in your life consistently is through social media. For example, I'm an artist, and on social media I follow a lot of Japanese illustrators and artists. In tandem with a lot of the Japanese brands I follow, and the fact that Australia is in a similar time zone to Japan, my social media timeline is mostly in Japanese, especially at times of day when Europeans and Americans are asleep. I'll read tweets and posts, and if there's a word I don't know, I'll look it up and learn from it and add to my deck, just like with everything else. It's excellent practice, just in my day-to-day life without even realizing it. Of course, getting a lot of your knowledge from consuming Japanese media can have some downsides. There's some small things you have to be aware of. Like with the example of songs, they may be good to get words added to your vocabulary bank, but they often use weird words and grammar, and they'll pronounce words differently just so it flows better for the sake of the song. So I wouldn't say they're excellent for listening examples. And there's similar issues with anime. You might learn some very specific niche words that might not be very practical for everyday use, such as with One Piece, you'll learn a lot about pirate talk, or if you're watching Sakamoto Days, for example, you'll learn a lot about gangster talk and assassination talk, which isn't really relevant at all, and the type of mannerisms and how characters will speak isn't how you should be speaking in Japan to real people. A good alternative to this, though, for listening practice is podcasts or streamers. I do this a bit myself. For example, I occasionally watch Japanese VTubers, and I'm also a big fan of Ado, so I listen to All Night Nippon, which is a radio show in Japan that she hosted for a while in 2023. But listening, reading, writing, that's all good. What about speaking? That's the trickier part. No matter how parasocial you may get, you cannot practice Japanese by speaking to the VTubers you watch through a screen. For me, I get the bulk of my Japanese speaking practice when I go to Japan, which is usually once a year, but obviously most people can't do that. The only other time I get to speak Japanese is at my IRL job when I'll occasionally have a Japanese customer and I get to speak with them briefly. When I'm out and about in my everyday life, I try to stop and remind myself to take note of words and things I talk about or think about that I don't know in Japanese so that I can study them later, or I'll just take a note down on my phone to go back to later. Overall, the main things I'd say that are important in learning Japanese is that you stay consistent with it and that you make sure you enjoy it. There's no one correct way to learn a language, and everyone has a different story and path towards learning it. Different methods work for different people, and the time it takes to learn a language is different for everyone. I've been learning a language to some degree since I was about 10 years old, and I'm still not fluent, and I'm sure some people have learned it in much less time. But no matter what progress you're making, just know that it's still worthwhile and good. And keep in mind that learning a language is a truly rewarding skill and is something you will never regret. It takes a long time and it is difficult, but the results more than pay for themselves. Nothing quite matches that feeling of suddenly realizing, hey, I can read this whole tweet, and then hey, I was able to understand this whole song, or I was able to follow this whole episode of an anime without subtitles, and eventually, wow, I was able to talk to this person. For me, I remember hearing the song Anata no Koibito ni Nari Tai for the first time and being able to understand it. It was incredible. And I had a similar experience when I started watching anime without subtitles for the first time. Taking that plunge into fully immersing myself in a language was something that felt so overdue, but so worthwhile and good once I finally started doing it. I hope this was a little helpful for some of you, or motivating. My own way of learning Japanese isn't the most well-refined, the most efficient, or by far from being the best, but it's what works for me, and it keeps me enjoying learning the language. So tell me about how you learn the language, and if this was useful for you, I'd be really keen to listen, and if you have had any magical moments like I have. Hello again, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video or related to it at all or found it entertaining, please let me know in the comments. I tried out a few different editing techniques and had fun with the sound effects and everything, so yeah, this was a video I was looking forward to making for a little while, so I'm glad I was able to get it out and make it a good one. I'm hoping to upload videos more frequently this year now, so if you're into that, please, if you want to stick around, drop a like on the video if you appreciated it, and subscribe to stick around for some more stuff. And yeah, I'll see you all shortly. So once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye!